Well, thank you. Bruchim habaim. Welcome, everyone. I'm really happy to see you all tonight. And if we get a few more people, that would be lovely too. But who's ever here, it's great. So Katie, welcome. Hector, welcome. Steve, welcome.
Fred, welcome.
Fred and Eve and Jackie and Marilyn. Jackie, you're very dark.
Am I, let me change some light.
I mean, sometimes we feel very dark, but
this is the first time we've seen Jackie.
I know. I'm very inexperienced with using the camera. So
all right. Well,
there, that's better.
Perfect. That's perfect.
Okay.
Great. So right now we have 13 people, 12 little boxes,
It's about to be 15.
And so we're about to have more. Yay. Welcome, Rachel. So we have, and here's Wes coming as well. Yay. Welcome, Wesley. So last time we gathered, I had forgotten to provide the blessing that we use to dive into our work. So tonight we have it, and Ned is my tech angel for the evening. So I sent it on, and it's the one page that's separate from everything else. And here we are, the blessing for Torah study. So we will enter into 1 hour of study together. But just everyone, let's center ourselves. So whatever you've done today, you have now given yourself the blessing of having an hour for yourself, for your mind, for your spirit, for your heart. So get comfortable in your seat and just realize this body has worked for you all day, and now you're giving it a rest. And this mind has worked for you too, and you are giving it a gift of studying Torah with this beautiful group of people. And this is the blessing that comes to us from our tradition. We'll do it in both Hebrew and English. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu
Melech haolam
asher
kitanu b'mitzvotav
tivanu
lasok
b'divrei
Torah.
And let's read it in English. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who has
Sanctified us with commandments,
and commanded us to be engaged
with words of Torah.
Amen. So I'm going to ask you all now to mute yourselves. And at the bottom of our screens, you'll see something that says reactions. And if you press that little smiley face, you see that there's an opportunity to raise your hand. And we're going to try and use that because I want to call on you at different times, but I'm going to ask you to be our reader, but also when you have questions, just raise your hand. Or you can just wave madly. That also works. But when Ned is helping me with the screen share, I can't see all of you at once. So, and there's now 16 participants. So I may need Ned's help, and because I want to honor everyone who's here with either an opportunity to read and definitely as you have questions. So we have a very, very rich portion tonight. One could say that Rabbi Bill Kuhn used to say, another one of my favorite Torah portions. So I want to try and cover quite a bit as we make our way through the book of Exodus. You see we're at chapter 27, and there are several chapters here, or several parshiot, portions that are focused on the building of the Mishkan, on the building of the sacred space that the Jews will use as their place of prayer. So, and here, they're no longer at the temple, they are creating really this first sanctuary on their desert journey, or they're talking about establishing it because they're still wandering. So this is all kind of the architectural team led by the Holy One who is blessed, God, meeting as they make their way through the desert. They're not actually doing the building, but they're talking about how they will do the building. So these are the instructions, and I had some fun with the colored print here. So I would like someone to read in English, verse 20, which is the very first verse of this portion. I'm going to just call on you because you're on my screen. Fred, would you read verse 20 in English?
Sure. You shall further instruct the Israelites to bring you clear oil of beaten olives for lighting, for kindling lamps regularly.
And I realized that somehow this sentence got scrambled when between me and Ned, and I apologize. I don't know how it happened, but the Hebrew got scrambled. The first two words of the Hebrew are the ones that are under the number 20. Titzaveh, and it's the whole sentence is now backwards. I am sorry, but I don't know how this happened. It should say ata titzaveh. All right, so for the very first word of the Torah portion is the one that's immediately under the word 20. And then the second word of the Torah portion is the next word. But of course, Hebrew goes from right to left. So this is completely playing with our ability to decipher. So the reason I put those in color is that to remind us all that the name of the Torah portion is usually the first or the second word. And in fact, it's the second word here, va'ata titzaveh. And what's interesting here, and this is going to come up later in our discussion tonight, there's this repeat. Oh, thank you for pointing that out. Your pointer, yay, Ned. This repeat, and you shall instruct. So it could say just titzaveh, but it begins with ata. In other words, you shall instruct. And what's one of the interesting things about this portion, which we're going to talk about today, is that Moses' name does not appear in this portion, even though he is the one to whom God is speaking. So, and the English could be, and you, paren, Moses, but it doesn't. It just says you. So the you is understood to be Moses. The other thing that we're going to go to why I put these final, what look like the final two words, and they're not, in red is, again, they're screwed up. They're in the wrong order. The first word is one that many of you know. You've said it throughout your lives if you've lit candles. That first word of two letters, but it's actually the second last word in the sentence. Can anyone tell me what it is in Hebrew?
Near.
Ner, good. Ner, which means candle. Lahadlik ner shel Shabbat. You've been saying that every week. Maybe if you've lit Shabbos candles. Here it is paired with another word. Can anyone read that in Hebrew?
Tamid.
Tamid, thank you, Muriel. So these two words together, ner tamid, mean what?
Eternal life.
Eternal light, good. So ner is candle or light, and tamid is ever, forever. If, when we're kids and we have a best friend, we promise we're going to be friends forever, tamid. So here is, we're going to really have to depend on the English here. You shall further instruct the Israelites to bring you clear oil of beaten olives for lighting, for kindling lamps regularly. And then in the second verse, which I'm going to ask, Ellen, I can see you. Would you just read 21 in English? Ellen, you have to unmute yourself, my friend.
Sorry,
Okay,
let me try again. Aaron and his sons shall set them up in a tent of meeting outside the curtain, which is over the ark of the pact, to burn from evening to morning before the Lord. It shall be a dew. Am I leaving out some? It shall be a dew from
Yeah.
the Israelites for all time throughout the ages.
so here's where it goes from regular lighting of the lamps to doing it from now on. And you can see, even though the line is scrambled, the second word in from the right in red is also a word that many of you are familiar with. Can anyone read it in Hebrew?
Olam.
Olam.
Olam, good,
World.
which means forever. So the Hebrew should read, Me'erev ad boker, from the evening until the morning, Lifnei Adonai, tukad olam ledorotam. And those three words together are the throughout all the ages. So we begin this Torah portion with, we could spend the entire hour that we have just talking about the lights and the Ner Tamid, but I don't want to leave it until we talk about what is a Ner Tamid in our experience as contemporary Jews and others who join us in our worship. What is a Ner Tamid? Fred.
It's the eternal flame that's above the ark in every synagogue.
Perfect. So that is called the Ner Tamid. A number of years ago, I visited a very, very small synagogue in New Hampshire. That was, the rabbi very proudly showed me that she had a solar Ner Tamid. And so this is a light that is always burning. And as children, some of you may have had the same experience that I did, that the minute you get in the sanctuary, you look up and you make sure, did it burn out? Did it burn out? Because we all knew it was electric. So a solar one hopefully wouldn't, or it would have a backup if indeed there were too many cloudy days in a row. But this is, as Fred says, this is something that's in every single synagogue across the world. Who would like to guess or know what this symbolizes for Jews throughout the ages? Any hands up? I know you know this. Yes, Heshi. Unmute.
May not know it. I may not know it, but I'm thinking the burning bush.
Ah, excellent. Very good.
And
Do
the,
we have some other ideas?
and the presence of Adonai.
Okay, so the one that's often that people will say is this is for God's eternal presence, that that's why we won't let the light go out. And so this light will burn perpetually. So now we're going to move on to the Torah portion moves from this light into a very elaborate conversation about the clothing that the priests wear. And I have mentioned in the past that there's this terrific book that some of you have called Torah Queeries. And I really wanted to borrow some of Marla Brettschneider's wonderful words on this Torah portion. So let's look at page 2, please, Ned. So here we are. I've shared quite a bit of her writing because I loved it so much. Marla happens to be a beloved friend of mine. She's a professor at the University of New Hampshire, as a matter of fact, and has written a lot on queer theory and on queer families and on Jews in the in the African Peninsula. She's really quite an interesting and provocative scholar and wrote a terrific chapter in this book. So those of you who are familiar with the book know that different scholars write chapters on each parshiot, and we were lucky enough to have Marla read. So I'm just going to call on people to read, and I hope, and if you don't want to, you'll just say no, thank you. Rachel, would you read the first paragraph for us?
How many times have I heard queers sneer some version of "those texts just don't speak to me," or "there is nothing recognizable," or "there isn't anything in the Bible that relates to the world as I know it." Yet Parashat Tetzaveh, in its exquisite attention to detail and ritualizing of the beautiful, is a queer text that speaks to me. One might say that its resonance to queer life for me is based on stereotype, given the text's flamboyance. Yet the flamboyant is a slice of queer life that is real to me and much beloved. Though flamboyance is commonly associated with excess and negatively balanced, in Tetzaveh we find an alternative framing of flamboyance as the sight that brings God nearer to us as a people.
All right, so I realized we kind of jumped into the analysis before we looked at the text itself, because I so much wanted to bring up the lights, but I can read, and some of you have a Torah with you, and I would recommend that if you want, you can take a look at the complicated and ornate descriptions that she's talking about. I'm just going to read, this is chapter 28, verse 4. These are the vestments they are to make: a breast piece, an ephod, a robe, a fringed tunic, a headdress, a sash. They shall make them for Aaron. They shall receive the gold, purple, blue, and crimson yarns and fine linen. They shall make the ephod of gold, of blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and a fine twisted linen. And it goes on and on. Take some stones, this stone from here and this stone of there, make frames of gold. We're going to go on to the breastpiece of decision, and then braided chains of corded gold. And the robe should have a binding of woven work around. It shall be like the opening of a coat of mail. And on its hem, there should be pomegranates of blue and purple and crimson yarn. It goes on and on. So that's what she's talking about here, that it's this very ornate description that goes on and on about the clothing. So I want to continue, and Wes, would you be willing to read the next couple paragraphs?
There's a breastpiece deemed an instrument of decision, far more awesome than powdered wigs and the flowing robes of Supreme Court justices. It is mounted in elaborate design with sapphire, turquoise, amethyst, emerald, and other richly colored precious stones. Preparing stunning attire is therefore prayer. Wearing a magnificent frock is an aspect of one's love for God. A pleasing sight is a divine offering. These clothes and fabulous accoutrements are ordered for no other reason than dignity and adornment. Yves Saint Laurent will be proud.
Let's drop it down, please, Ned, to finish this paragraph.
Any boy in the Castro, West Hollywood, or Chelsea knows the rules. The femme, the butch, and the take up such ablutions religiously.
All right, so the idea that here, who gets to wear fabulous clothes and parade around in them? We all, those of us who have had the opportunity to live in a gay community or have good friends who have lived in the gay community know this. Yes, it's a perpetuation of a stereotype, but she's really having fun with it. So, Danny, would you continue?
Sure. Why were the events and people in this textual moment so flamboyant, and how does this flamboyance connect to queerness in a contemporary sensibility and the public presentation of self? Often it is through clothes and related components of affect that we push boundaries. Frequently it is through pushing boundaries that we connect to the present and the holiness of what is before us and how we are situated. It is often in the extreme that we encounter ecstasy, bits of the divine.
All right, one more paragraph and then we are done with this, and I would love to hear what you guys think. So Susan, would you take us home, as they say?
Extravagant clothes, rituals, meals, sacrifices, get this bigger here, and anointings are central to the creation of the priesthood. Reading Tetzaveh from within a contemporary culture that associates queers with flamboyance and flamboyance with ruin, the Parsha offers up a sigh of relief and a moment of validation. By providing a glimpse into a world that creates flamboyance and then marks it as holy, Tetzaveh opens up an opportunity to appreciate the fabulousness of contemporary queer culture. In the text, this space of excess is named not as some hedonistic den, but as the tent of meeting, the dwelling place of the divine. Queers have heard endless rants about the godlessness of our most prized sites and practices of pleasure, meaning, and relationship. As a counterpoint, in Tetzaveh, it is here, in this place of lavish beauty, that God will meet with the Israelites, speak to us, and abide among us.
So what do you think? So Ned, I'm going to ask you to close the text so that I and maybe all of us can see everybody's face. So this is a different take. So I see Marilyn, you'll be first, and then Muriel, and then whoever else wants to be next, and then Fred. Okay, so Marilyn, please.
Saturday on Torah study, I thought about the same thing that I'm thinking about now, and that is Liberace. Liberace was the absolute embodiment of flamboyance, and looking at him not as an object of ridicule, because there was a lot of that at the time, but as a really brave expression of himself and of the world that he inhabited.
Wow, thank you.
And anybody who ever saw him on stage has never forgotten it.
All right, I'm wondering if everybody knows who Liberace was.
Those of us who are older know.
Well, right. So younger people, do you? Wesley is looking a little perplexed. Okay, so there's some interesting movies and documentaries about him. I'm hardly an expert on him, but Marilyn, do you want to say something about him and who he was? A sentence?
Well, just that he was a performer, he was a musician, and he was flamboyantly gay. Unapologetically gay, and the symbols that he made his were these very bejeweled, heavy, furred costumes. And when he performed, he would change them and he would come on screen in a jeweled Rolls Royce. I don't mean on screen, I mean on stage. And he was also, which people forget, he was wildly talented. And that, in a way, sometimes took second place to his persona, which was also something that drew people in. It was 50 or 60 years ago. So I think a lot of his gayness was maybe under wraps. There was curiosity and so on. And apparently, he lived, as gay men did 50 or 60 years ago, a very unhappy and tragic life having to do with, I don't know, I don't even remember. I remember a movie about a love affair that he had that with a younger man, and it ended badly. I don't remember the details, but he was very much a presence, especially in Las Vegas, where he was very big, and where in a way he symbolized and personified a certain.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm going to share a photograph of him.
Oh, okay.
Quickly.
Well,
I'm going to just insert myself here. There he is.
Yeah.
Wow, he looks really good there.
Well, he
So
was
there's-
young there. And of course, there was this thing about his mother, and he always had a candelabra on his piano that had some kind of meaning. I don't remember what. But yeah,
Thank you, Ned.
His piano was
There you
mirrored.
go.
yeah.
Yes,
The
it was
entire piano
mirrored.
was mirrored.
Yeah. Okay, Muriel was
Well,
next.
I kind of had a question. I remember, so I guess it was 30 years ago yeah, maybe almost 30 years ago, when I was teaching high school, having like Leo, the student of mine who, we would describe him, he would be described as flamboyant, like he'd come in with like a cape and all this stuff. And that was a long time ago for a high school kid to be essentially showing that he was gay. And I always thought that the term flamboyant was negative, I didn't know, like, was that an appropriate way to describe someone? Was it nasty to say that about someone?
Oh, wow, what a beautiful question for this group. Would we like a response to Muriel, the wonderful retired teacher? Ash.
So I think flamboyant referred to somebody who was out there with their clothing, with their speech. Sometimes there was an association with men who were effeminate and spoke effeminately, or and wore. I mean, they were just, you know, expressive, and their hands, you know, when they would talk, and they would be considered flamboyant, but it was not a pejorative at all, unless you were using it as a pejorative. Mm-hmm. So I think depending on who said it, you know, if I said you're flamboyant, it wouldn't be a pejorative, but if somebody who was, if somebody wanted to be a little cagey about it, they could also, and it would be pejorative. So it was depending on who said it, and who wore it.
Thank you, Hesh. Fred, did you want to add something to that?
Well, I was going to add, I know at times I like to be flamboyant, so I do like that word. But I see there's something magical in the Torah portion relating to, it's almost like the blueprint for Pride and the Pride Parade and that magical month of June. Like I see that from that Torah portion, which is really, really wonderful. And I think that's kind of what she was saying too.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Ellen.
So just listening to the other comments, I just want to add something to what I was going to say, which is that my trans granddaughter, when she was expressing her identity, maybe at the ages of 4, 5, 6, 7, would wear the most elaborate, sparkly, incredible princess dresses and tiaras and that she could possibly find. And now that she's older, she doesn't need to do that anymore. But that kind of really significant outward expression is very common with young trans girls to do that. And I really think it's a way of making a statement and saying, here I am, and this is who I'm comfortable being. And I've always thought there's something really so brave and wonderful about it. And the other thing that I wanted to say is it really reminds me of Purim. And for years, I had such very negative feelings about Purim and cross-dressing because I thought that it was objectifying and almost mean, if you will. But I've come to understand that if it's done with good intent, it's actually a way of playing with gender and costume and flamboyance in the best sense, as Heshi was talking about it. And to me, this portion of the text just really speaks to that.
Wonderful. And you're making a connection that we were just on the verge of making between this portion and Purim, because this portion is always read right around the time of Purim, as it is this week. So this is the week in which we read this portion. And as you know, congregations are celebrating Purim this very week. So Steve, oh, you were clapping or you're raising your hand?
No, I was raising my hand.
Okay.
It's wonderful hearing this whole analysis and the commentary, in that growing up as a child, being flamboyant was not considered desirable typically, and dressing up, if you will, even for shul, was considered just being a show off. And there were endless negative connotations to all of it. So this is very refreshing.
Great. Do I see some other hands? So here we are, Erev Purim, and I want us now to skip, Ned, to page 5 of the handout, and we're going to take a look at a very different text, but a text that draws together, not that, go on beyond that one, we're going to skip that for now, that draws together the fact that this Torah portion is read around the time of Purim. So again, if you don't mind, I really appreciate the reading out loud, and I hope that's helpful for you folks. So let's see. Who hasn't read yet? Marilyn, why don't you start with the first paragraph? And this is not the entire essay that Rabbi Grant writes, but it's excerpted from her piece in the Torah, a Women's Commentary. Marilyn. You'll have to unmute to read.
Most years, this Torah portion is read during the week preceding Purim. The connection between the Parsha and Purim is not immediately apparent. Tzitzaveh is filled with exacting details about the assembly of the priestly garments and the ritual role Aaron and his sons are to perform as anointed priests. The Book of Esther is a melodramatic tale of threat, intrigue, and ultimate redemption through plot twists and reluctant heroism of a beautiful queen.
So, of course, we could have spent our whole night tonight just taking a look at the Book of Esther and the reversals in this wonderful tale, and all the sexual innuendo and the roles of men and women and those who may be in between. And because the palace eunuchs, as they are usually called, play a very important role in the plot. And those of you who don't know the story, I welcome you to come to a Purim celebration, because this story will be told. But we're going to assume that you know something about it, and I hope that's okay as we continue. Steve, would you read the next little paragraph?
While the plots and purposes of these texts are vastly different, each in its own way asks us to confront an absence. Titava is the only parsha from the beginning of the book of Exodus until the end of Deuteronomy, when the name of Moses does not appear. And Esther is one of only 2 books of the Bible where the name of Esther does not appear.
Where the name of God does not appear.
Yes.
Okay, so then I've highlighted Rabbi Grant's question: what insight can this parallel presence of absence convey? So Moses's name, as I already mentioned, doesn't come up in this parsha, and it's only and that's very rare. It's the only parsha from the beginning of Exodus, when he's born, until the end of Deuteronomy, when he dies. But his name is not mentioned. And one of the things that one studies always, when we study the book of Esther, is God's name is never mentioned in the text, that it could be a folktale from any culture that is not connected to a religious community. So this parallel presence of absence, what does this teach us? So Fred, would you continue?
Sure. The first verse of the Parsha reads, "And you yourself shall command the children of Israel." Moses in parentheses. Moses's presence is momentarily diminished so that the other leaders can step forward to serve the broader needs of the community. Am I continuing?
Yeah.
Okay. Just as we can see Moses as a behind the scenes mover in the Parsha, so too can we see God as fulfilling a similar role in the Purim narrative.
Okay, so now I'm going to ask Ned to move our reading down so we can finish this up. One more paragraph. Nope. Yes, that's the paragraph that I'd like us to look at. And I'm wondering if Hector, would you be willing to read this paragraph?
The Purim message that sometimes gets lost in all the revelry is that a sense of God's presence in the world, even if hidden and obscure, gives us the strength and moral purpose to cope with uncertainties and imperfections. Parashat Tetzaveh paints a picture of the detail and exacting effort it took for the Israelites to feel God's presence in their midst. Today, we have no priests and no temple. The only vestige we have of this experience is the Ner Tamid, the eternal light, the first thing that God instructs Moses to establish in the opening verses of the parasha. For us, then, the glory and splendor of God's presence must be felt through the study of Torah and the constant striving to live in its light.
Thank you. So here we have taken the story of Purim, which is, and I hope some of you are going to be able to participate in, RS always has a wonderful Purim spiel. And in fact, I think it was one of the great gifts of the coming together of Beth Ahava and Road of Shalom to spice up and loosen up the Purim spiels at the synagogue. That here we have this story that seems to be only a story about an evil king and a righteous woman, and it goes from the sackcloth that Mordecai is wearing to then he becomes the Secretary of State and is clothed not quite in Liberace's clothing, but some really fancy clothing. And the person who seems to be the villain gets hanged at the end of the story. And one of the lines that's in the book of Esther is La Yehudim Haita Ora v'Simcha v'Sason Ken Tihye Lanu. For the Jews, there was light and joy. May it also be for us. And especially in this year of what we've been going through, to look forward to a holiday that is about light and joy and celebration and a lot of silliness, that we're asking, a lot of ourselves to put aside the heaviness of these times of the pandemic, of the heavy winter that has been really hard for so many people in Texas and for some of us even in the Northeast, and to say it's time for joy. We must have some time for joy. And Rabbi Grant here, being a good rabbi, brings it all back to God. So I really want to hear what you folks think about these two different but perhaps complementary approaches to this Torah portion and to these two stories that are so different and yet have these common themes. So let's hear from you. I can now see all of your beautiful faces. You can just raise your real hand. You don't have to press anything on the screen if you don't want to. So you can share a Purim memory as we've begun to, what this holiday has meant to you in the past. It's not just about the yummy food and sharing food with one another. There is a tradition, of course, of shalach manos, of sending gifts to one another on this holiday. And, you know, if we were meeting in person, I would have definitely baked some hamantaschen to share with you all. Sorry, I can't deliver it all to your homes. All right, your hand is up, Heshi and David.
So when I was in Aleph in Hebrew school, so I can't tell you how many years ago that is, I played King Ahasuerus in the Purim play. And my mother made me a beautiful blue cape with ermine, I don't know if it's ermine or fur thing, and I had a cape and I had a scepter, and I walked onto the stage and I said, 1, 2, 3, Ahasuerus, you see, with crown of gold and scepter too, I enter merrily. That, swear to God, that is my Purim recollection.
So just in case, I mean,
it was an 8.
All right, would someone like to raise their hand and say if they need the story told better than I did and someone else can tell it? Or do you have the basic?
I would like a quick thing about the eunuchs.
Okay. So the story is of a foolish king who gets drunk with his buddies a lot and has these very lavish meals with his people. We should have better language after what we've just gone through in the last 4 years. His flunkies, I guess. And he asks his wife, whose name is Vashti, to come and dance before him and his assembled multitudes. And she refuses. And of course, like any other Jewish tale, there's lots of midrash, there's lots of explanations, there's lots of filling in the blanks. Why didn't she come and dance before them? Because he wanted her to dance naked and she had some pride and wasn't going to do it. We don't really know why she said no, but she definitely said no to him. And then he banished her because if he put up with this kind of behavior, then all of the women in the whole his entire commonwealth would have done the same to their husbands and dissed them. So he had to get rid of her, but then of course he needed a wife. The whole thing is quite a ridiculous story. So he searches the land for the most perfect virgin and has them all parade, which is part of what children do every year, is to have a Purim parade in our flamboyant clothing. But the parade is about choosing the queen, and he, unbeknownst to him, chooses a nice Jewish girl whose name is Esther. And her name is about hiddenness. And in fact, the word Megillah, which is the name of the scroll that we read, is also the word Megillah has the word hiddenness in it. So it's the hiddenness of the secret, Esther, this secret person. So anyway, he chooses this woman, and meanwhile, his number one guy is this villain Haman. And when we read the book, when we tell the story, we always make a lot of noise whenever we say the H word. So this villain decrees that he has wanted everyone to bow down to him, and Mordecai, the Jew, has not bowed down to him. And so he loses it and says, we have to kill the Jews and I'm going to build 3 gallows for them. But we're going to kill all the Jews. Well, meanwhile, now there's a Jew in the palace, and she is prepared to meet the king. There's a sub story here about the 1001 Nights, about which some of you may remember, about the Scheherazade is the clever queen, the clever princess who beguiles the king by telling him stories so that he won't rape her. So there's that kind of strain here of being prepared to meet the king. And who prepares Esther to meet the king? The eunuchs. So these are men who have been, whose orientation in the world has been changed by some kind of evil decree, and they are no threat, so they can become the hairdressers and the clothiers and everything else to prepare the young virgin to meet her king. So that's just, but obviously this story is extremely rich because there's so much going on, and just, we know that she does and goes and confronts the king, not with, I'm about to be destroyed, but rather, would it please the king to come and have dinner with me? She prepares a really beautiful feast, and it works out very well. And then she prepares another feast, and he comes with Haman, and she tells the king that someone is planning to kill her. And meanwhile, Haman is lounging on her couch. And so it looks really bad that he is indeed seducing her. And actually, as I'm telling you, I'm sure that I'm bringing in some midrash into the story that might not be in the Megillah, because I haven't read it this year. So you will all correct me by attending a reading of the Megillah and then say, boy, Sue, you embroidered this quite a bit. But it's this great story, and Esther becomes our hero, and Haman is indeed hanged on the very gallows. He and his children, his sons, of course he had no daughters, are hanged on the gallows, and Mordecai, Esther's uncle, it's also unclear, Esther's uncle, saves the Jews and takes Mordecai's place, takes Haman's place as the right hand of the king. I'm leaving out some details that are in the Megillah. So thanks for asking about the eunuchs. And I hope I haven't embroidered in a bad way. I guess because I'm gay, I embroidered it. Okay, so Ned.
Yes, I actually, since I had some time on my hands, found an original photograph of the beauty pageant that took place back then. I was wondering if I could show you.
Of course.
Looks, don't you think?
I think it's great. Thank you very much.
That's my contribution.
Wonderful. Muriel.
I just wanted to say, I really came to my Jewish background late in life. And I didn't know that much about Purim other than Hamantashen, but I learned a lot by going to the spiels that happened at RS back when Beth Ahava was doing them with Jerry. Jerry was like the star with Jocelyn, and those were incredible.
And Roy.
What?
And Roy was in them as well. So.
Oh, yeah, well, because I knew Jerry, I didn't know most of the people. But they were so much fun.
Well, I hope it's going to be fun this year too.
I'm sure it is, but.
Susan's saying yes, yay.
Yep.
Susan, do you want to give us a little preview of what's going to be happening at our
Well, I have nothing to do with it, but all indications of from what I've heard from a number of people is that it's really fun.
Oh, good.
And because they had the time for everybody to record and to piece it together, you know, we're in the age of Zoom, so there's the pros and cons, but there were some good things about that too.
Yeah, yeah.
So I put something in the chat earlier, you know, bring a
thank you.
snack, bring a drink, 6 o'clock Thursday.
Okay, great, great. So other thoughts about Purim, Tetzaveh, flamboyance? Yes, Ellen.
I'm remembering I've got to do the unmute thing. So I've been thinking how interesting that maybe there's a connection between being hidden and coming out. And how those two things might work together, because that idea of tzimtzum, you know, the self-contraction, so that maybe to give freedom to people to be their authentic selves. So I don't know, but that's the thought that came to my mind.
Lovely. Who is sparked by that to continue that conversation? Danny.
Yeah, I was going to raise something similar. Going back to the Torah portion, the idea of like flamboyance being written in the Torah, like from the beginning of our times, and yet flamboyance is in modern times is associated with like the shame. You know, people who are flamboyant or dressed a certain way have to hide. I think of like the ball culture, the Black and Latinx ball culture in New York in the 90s. Like they were underground, and they were kind of, when I think of flamboyance, that's the roots that I think of for today's modern society of flamboyance. And to live with such shame and fear, there's an irony here that I think Ellen really draws nicely. The sort of coming out but remaining hidden at the same time in a lot of ways. And so there's just a lot of layers that I wanted to explore.
Thank you, and for bringing in that particular culture. I think Fred is going to expand on this for us too.
I was going to say I was a queer Jewish boy growing up in Cleveland, Ohio, in a very conservative synagogue called Temple on the Heights. And I remember it always being, there was something like deep inside, I knew I was queer, and there was always something just very like rigid and kind of scary about being in the synagogue. But what stands out to me as a young queer kid was, I remember Purim was all of a sudden this, like, to me, it seemed like a Jewish queer festival that just sort of happened, where men might dress as Esther. I mean, like people might alter gender roles and things like that. It was like, oh my God, there's this Jewish holiday that is gay or something like that. So I think that's what I'm feeling from everything we're hearing today.
Anyone else want to say something about it? I think, Rachel, do you have your hand up?
I did. I would be interested to hear if anyone has personal experiences on this, but I find it interesting, and I've sort of examined this in my own life, but it's a very small sample, is that sort of cross-dressing for a holiday such as Purim or Halloween, if you experience that as a young American person, I don't know. I've kind of never, like as a person, I've never really felt right about the idea of someone dressing in the opposite gender's clothing as being funny. Like I think that evoking humor always has rubbed me the wrong way. And I would be interested to know like what that kind of experience was like at other synagogues. I mean, you can look at it one way as a celebration, but in some ways, I don't know. It felt odd to me as a young person.
Hmm.
Can I jump in? Because I was going to talk about something similar.
Please, Hector, please.
I was also thinking about this when Ellen spoke earlier. So because they're kind of, I guess, multiple sides of this. So there are people who will sort of men who will dress as women as sort of a joke, but then there are men who will wear women's clothing and sort of hide behind the jokiness of it, while at the same time kind of that's when they feel like most happy, but they know that they have to kind of put on that, they have to turn it into a joke so that they're not judged in a certain way. So there are so many pieces of this that also get tied back to that hiddenness idea. And then I had other thoughts about hiddenness, because it actually reminds me of a conversation we're having at the Tu B'Shvat Seder about trees and how they have so many hidden functions that benefit us, that people don't think about all the time. And that made me think of all the queer people who benefit the world in so many ways, but don't get acknowledged. Someone like Bayard Rustin, for example, and this, I study African American religious history, so there's a long conversation about queer performers in churches who everyone knows they're queer, everyone refuses to talk about it, but everyone benefits from their presence. And so, yeah, all those things are going through my head while we talk about hiddenness, and sort of our place in this whole conversation.
Oh, thank you so much. That really enriches what we're doing. I'm looking at the clock. We only have 4 minutes, but this has been enormously rich. This whole idea of, I mean, it's one, that Purim always has many faces. And here again, that it's like someone who is, what do you call it? Someone who's spying for 2 countries, a double spy or something, that you're getting away with it, but you're not really getting away with it because it's your real person. It's really who you are. And that I spent almost a year on a kibbutz, and I was there at Purim, and to see some of these burly farmer guys get up and wear women's clothes and sing in falsetto on Purim, and think as you say, Hector, maybe it's finally they get to do that, and yet then they had to go back to the other persona. And all of us have grown up, I hope not every one of the young people, but I'm afraid that may be true too, in a very gendered culture, a very binary culture of what men and what women should be, and a culture of toxic masculinity and toxic femininity. And so here is an opportunity, this one holiday, which does turn it on its head, but it's only one holiday. And I saw that Susan said something in the chat about the tradition of getting so drunk that you can't tell the difference between the hero and the villain, between Mordecai and Haman. And we all know that, alcohol has taken too many lives of people who haven't been able to live as themselves in the world. Here we are on the eve of Purim, yet again, asking, I hope, some good questions about the function of the holiday, about where and who would we want to be? Who are we, and what face do we want to put to the world? And just to end with the fact that the word mask used to be something we thought of only on Purim, and now we're wearing them every single day. But the idea of what is hidden and what is revealed, both in the masks that we wear, the faces we put on, and the faces that we reveal to one another. So I want to thank all of you for sharing your faces on this funny medium that we have. And this month is about joy and about finding joy even in the darkest time. So for some of us, getting to study Torah is joy. For some of us, for me, seeing your beautiful faces every other week is a source of joy. So thank you so much for showing up. And I look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. And let us be happy it's the month of Adar.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Rabbi, thank you very
Rabbi.
much.
This has
Thank
been amazing.
you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Nice
And-
seeing
and
all of
the
you.
smiling faces. I love this. Everyone's
Awesome.
smiling.
That's awesome.
Everyone have fun for Purim.
Yeah.
Right.
Stay well, everyone.
Yes.
And I don't mean
stay
that you
well.
actually should get that drunk, but
No, no, I'm
That's
not
the
recommending it either.
closet.
All right.
All
Bye,
right.
everyone.
Good night. Thank you, Rabbi.
Joy.
Good night, all.
Joy.
Bye.
Night.